It was a crisp autumn morning in suburban Pennsylvania, the kind that makes you want to wrap your hands around a warm cup of coffee and watch the leaves dance in the wind. Little Andy, a bright-eyed 5-year-old with untamed brown curls and a missing front tooth, was bouncing with excitement in the back seat of his mom's blue minivan. His mother, Mrs. Chen, had promised him their special Saturday morning treat, McDonald's breakfast. The familiar golden arches came into view, and Andy could barely contain himself. He'd been looking forward to his favorite hash browns all week, especially after getting a gold star in kindergarten for helping his classmate with building blocks. As they pulled into the parking lot, Andy noticed it was much busier than usual. Cars filled nearly every spot, and people were gathering outside, many holding their phones up as if waiting for something special to happen. "Wow, Mummy, look at all the people," Andy exclaimed, pressing his nose against the car window. Mrs. Chen carefully maneuvered through the crowded lot, finally finding a spot near the back. "Must be because of the fall festival downtown," she said, helping Andy unbuckle his car seat. Inside, the restaurant was buzzing with energy. The smell of fresh coffee and breakfast sandwiches filled the air, mixing with the excited chatter of customers. Andy held his mom's hand tightly as they waited in line, his eyes wandering around the restaurant. He noticed the usual morning crowd, elderly couples sharing coffee, teenagers huddled over their phones, and families like his own enjoying their weekend treats. The restaurant staff seemed a bit more alert than usual, moving with extra purpose. Andy watched as one of the workers, an older lady with kind eyes and gray hair tucked under her cap, kept glancing at her watch and straightening the already neat counter. Something was different about today, but Andy couldn't quite figure out what. Mrs. Chen ordered their usual, a Happy Meal with extra hash browns for Andy and a coffee with an Egg McMuffin for herself. They found a cozy booth near the window, where Andy could watch the falling leaves outside while enjoying his breakfast. He loved how the morning sun made patterns on their table through the window, and he started tracing them with his finger. "Remember to eat your food before it gets cold, sweetie," Mrs. Chen reminded him gently, sipping her coffee. Andy nodded, but his attention was caught by more people gathering outside. Some had cameras, and others were pointing at black SUVs that had just pulled into the parking lot. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted subtly. The regular breakfast chatter quieted down, replaced by curious whispers and the sound of chairs scraping as people turned to look outside. Even the staff behind the counter seemed to stand a little straighter, their movements becoming more precise and careful. Andy noticed a group of men in dark suits entering the restaurant, their eyes scanning every corner of the room. They moved with purpose, speaking quietly into devices on their wrists. It reminded Andy of the movies his dad watched, except this was happening right in front of him. "Mummy," Andy whispered, tugging at his mother's sleeve, "something's happening." Mrs. Chen looked up from her phone, her eyes widening slightly as she noticed the changes around them. The morning had started like any other Saturday, but now there was an unmistakable feeling that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Little did Andy know that his regular Saturday morning McDonald's trip was about to become anything but ordinary. As he sat there, munching on his hash browns and watching the scene unfold, he had no idea that he was about to play a crucial role in what would become a remarkable story, one that would prove that even the smallest observers can make the biggest differences. The tension in the air was building, but it wasn't scary. It was more like the feeling just before opening a present on Christmas morning. Andy took another bite of his hash brown, his young mind trying to piece together what was happening around him. His father, Officer Chen, had always taught him to be observant, to notice the little details that others might miss. Today, those lessons would prove more valuable than anyone could have imagined. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor as the regular McDonald's breakfast crowd unknowingly became part of an extraordinary event that was about to unfold. And at the center of it all sat a small boy with a hash brown in one hand and curiosity sparkling in his eyes, completely unaware that he was about to become an unexpected hero. The buzz in McDonald's grew stronger as more men in dark suits entered, forming a protective circle around the entrance. Then, through the glass doors walked a familiar figure that Andy had seen countless times on TV. Donald Trump, with his signature hair and navy blue suit, stepped into the restaurant. The entire place erupted in whispers and gasps. Phones came out everywhere, their cameras clicking rapidly. Some people stood up, while others remained frozen in their seats, breakfast sandwiches halfway to their mouths. Mrs. Chen quietly touched Andy's hand, both of them watching the scene unfold. "Good morning, everyone," Trump announced with his characteristic smile, waving to the crowd. He seemed relaxed, as if stopping at a small-town McDonald's was the most natural thing in the world. The restaurant staff behind the counter looked at each other, clearly not having expected to serve a former president during their morning shift. The manager, who had been organizing breakfast orders just moments ago, hurried forward with a professional smile. Her hands smoothed her uniform as she welcomed the unexpected guest. Trump's security detail had already checked the premises, but they remained vigilant, positioned strategically around the restaurant. Andy watched in amazement as Trump walked up to the counter, just like any other customer. "I'll have a Big Mac and a Diet Coke," he said, causing a few chuckles in the crowd. Even at breakfast time, he stuck to his famous order. The manager personally took his order, her hands slightly shaking with excitement. While everyone's attention was focused on Trump, Andy's eyes wandered around the restaurant. His dad had always told him to notice things that seemed out of place, like a game they played together. That's when he spotted something that made his stomach feel funny. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a decorative plant, sat two men who didn't seem interested in their food or phones. Unlike everyone else who was excited and taking pictures, these men kept looking at each other and then at Trump. One of them kept reaching inside his jacket, and their faces looked tense, not happy like the other customers. Andy remembered the special hand signal his dad had taught him, the one that meant danger. Officer Chen had shown it to him during one of their safety lessons, saying it could be important someday. Andy hadn't understood why then, but now something in his gut told him this was important. The little boy's heart started beating faster. He looked at his mom, who was busy taking a photo like everyone else. The two men in the corner were now whispering to each other, their movements becoming more urgent. One of them slowly stood up, adjusting something under his jacket. Andy knew he had to do something. His dad had always said, "If you see something wrong, tell someone who can help." But with all the noise and excitement, how could he get Trump's attention? The former president was now posing for selfies with some customers, his security team keeping a close watch. Gathering all his courage, Andy slid out of his booth, despite his mother's surprised, "Andy, where are you going?" He walked closer to where Trump was standing, his small frame weaving through the forest of adult legs. One of the security guards noticed him but didn't stop him. After all, he was just a little kid. When Andy was about 10 feet away from Trump, he caught the former president's eye. In that brief moment of connection, Andy's small hands formed the signal his father had taught him, the universal sign for danger. He then pointed discreetly toward the corner where the suspicious men sat. Trump's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Years of public life had taught him to maintain composure, but Andy saw something flash across his face: recognition, concern, and understanding. Without causing alarm, Trump's eyes followed Andy's subtle gesture toward the corner. The atmosphere in the restaurant remained cheerful and excited, with customers still taking photos and children waving from their tables. But beneath this normal surface, something serious was unfolding. Trump casually leaned closer to his head of security, whispering something while maintaining his public smile. The security team's response was immediate but subtle. They didn't want to cause panic. Two agents quietly moved toward the corner while others closed ranks around Trump. The former president himself reached for his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen while he continued to smile and wave at the crowd. Andy felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. His mother had caught up with him. "Honey, we shouldn't bother Mr. Trump," she whispered, but before she could lead him away, Trump himself turned to them. His eyes met Andy's again, and this time there was something different in them. A mix of gratitude and admiration. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, but now there was an undercurrent of tension that only a few people in the restaurant could feel. And at the center of it all stood a small boy who had just done something very brave, though he wasn't quite sure yet how important it was. The next few moments in the McDonald's restaurant seemed to move in slow motion. Andy stood close to his mother, watching as Trump's security team smoothly moved into position. The former president maintained his friendly demeanor, still talking with customers and signing autographs, but his eyes kept darting to the corner where the suspicious men sat. The little boy's heart was pounding in his chest. He couldn't help but think about all the times his dad had told him stories about being a police officer, about how sometimes the smallest details could make the biggest difference. Now those lessons felt more real than ever. Through the chatter and excitement, Andy noticed one of Trump's security agents speaking quietly into his wrist microphone. Another agent had positioned himself near the emergency exit, while a third was casually walking past the suspicious men's table, appearing to head toward the restroom. The two men in the corner had noticed the subtle changes in the room. Their movements became more nervous, more rigid. One of them kept glancing at his watch, while the other's hand remained inside his jacket. They seemed to be having a heated, whispered conversation, their faces growing increasingly tense. Trump, meanwhile, had taken out his phone. While continuing to smile and chat with admirers, he quickly typed something. Andy later learned that this was the moment when the former president sent a direct message to emergency services. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling him that this 5-year-old boy's warning needed to be taken seriously. Mrs. Chen was still confused about what was happening. She held Andy's hand protectively, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Andy, sweetheart, what did you see?" she whispered, but before Andy could answer, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted dramatically. One of the suspicious men suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the cheerful buzz of conversation, drawing everyone's attention. For a split second, everything seemed frozen, the customers with their phones still raised, the staff behind the counter, the security team with their hands now moving toward their jackets. Trump's lead security agent stepped forward, placing himself between the former president and the direction of the potential threat. Other agents moved with practiced precision, creating a protective barrier while simultaneously closing in on the suspicious men's location. The second man tried to stand up too, but he found himself face to face with one of the agents who had quietly approached from behind. "Sir, please remain seated," the agent said firmly but calmly, his hand resting on the man's shoulder. The first man, now standing, looked frantically between his companion and the exits, realizing they were surrounded. Throughout all this, Trump remained remarkably composed. He turned to the restaurant manager and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Ma'am, I think it would be wise to begin quietly evacuating your customers. My team will handle this situation." The manager nodded, her face pale but professional, and began discreetly directing her staff to guide people toward the exits. Andy felt his mother's grip tighten on his hand as they were gently ushered toward the door by a young employee. But before they could leave, Trump caught Andy's eye one more time. The former president gave him a small nod, a gesture of thanks that made Andy stand a little taller. Outside, the parking lot was filling with police cars, their lights flashing silently. Officer Chen had always told Andy that sometimes the quietest police arrivals were the most serious ones. He watched as uniformed officers quickly but calmly approached the restaurant, their movements precise and coordinated. Mrs. Chen pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed her husband's number. "Honey, you won't believe what just happened," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Andy could hear his father's concerned voice on the other end of the line. From their safe position outside, Andy watched through the window as the police entered the restaurant. The two suspicious men were now completely surrounded by law enforcement and security personnel. Their faces showed defeat as they realized their plans had been foiled by the most unlikely of observers, a 5-year-old boy with keen eyes and the courage to act. The morning sun had risen higher now, its rays reflecting off the police cars' windshields. Other customers who had been evacuated stood in small groups, talking in hushed voices about what they had witnessed. Some were still recording with their phones, while others were calling their families to share the incredible story. Andy felt a strange mix of emotions, excitement, fear, and pride, all swirling together in his young mind. He had used what his father taught him, and it had mattered. Really mattered. As he watched the scene continue to unfold, he squeezed his mother's hand, thinking about how he couldn't wait to tell his dad every detail of this extraordinary morning. Little did Andy know that this was just the beginning of his story. The events that would follow would show just how significant his simple act of bravery had been, and how sometimes the most powerful heroes come in the smallest packages. Outside the McDonald's, the The scene had transformed from a quiet Saturday morning into something that looked like a movie set. Police cars lined the parking lot, their red and blue lights bouncing off the restaurant windows. Andy and his mother stood with other customers behind a yellow police tape that officers had quickly set up. The little boy couldn't take his eyes off the restaurant entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see police officers talking to the two men who were now sitting quietly in chairs, their hands behind their backs. Trump's security team stood nearby, looking serious and professional as they spoke with local law enforcement. A familiar voice suddenly called out, "Andy, Lisa." Andy turned to see his father, Officer Chen, rushing toward them in his police uniform. He must have been on duty when the call came in. Andy ran to his dad, who scooped him up in a big bear hug. "Are you both okay?" he asked, looking between his son and wife with concern. Mrs. Chen nodded, still looking shaken. "We're fine. But honey, you won't believe what Andy did." She began explaining how their son had noticed something suspicious and used the safety signal they had practiced at home. Officer Chen listened, his expression changing from worry to pride as he heard the story. Inside the restaurant, things were moving quickly. Police officers were carefully searching the suspects and collecting evidence. Trump had moved to a secure area but kept glancing in Andy's direction through the window. The former president seemed deep in conversation with several high-ranking officers and his security team. A detective in plain clothes approached the Chen family. "Excuse me," she said kindly, "but we'd like to talk to Andy about what he saw this morning. Would that be okay?" She looked at Officer Chen, who nodded his approval. "That's Detective Thompson. She's one of our best," he told his son reassuringly. Andy sat with Detective Thompson at a nearby police car while his parents stood close by. He told her everything he had noticed about the suspicious men, how they weren't taking pictures like everyone else, how they kept reaching inside their jackets, and how they seemed nervous instead of excited. "You're very observant," Detective Thompson said, writing in her notebook. "Just like your dad." She smiled at Officer Chen, who was beaming with pride. "The signal you used, can you show me what it looks like?" Andy demonstrated the hand signal his father had taught him, and the detective nodded approvingly. As Andy finished talking with Detective Thompson, a commotion near the restaurant caught everyone's attention. The two suspects were being led out in handcuffs, surrounded by stern-faced officers. Andy couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw one of the men look in his direction, his face a mix of surprise and frustration at being caught by a child's keen eyes. Following the suspects, Trump emerged from the restaurant with his security detail. Instead of heading straight to his waiting vehicle, he walked purposefully toward the Chen family. The crowd of onlookers fell silent, phones raised to capture the moment. "Young man," Trump said, kneeling down to Andy's eye level, "I want to thank you personally. What you did today was very brave and very important." He reached out to shake Andy's small hand, treating him with the same respect he would show an adult. "Your father has taught you well." Andy's face lit up with a proud smile. "My dad says we should always help keep people safe," he replied simply, causing Trump to chuckle warmly. The former president turned to Officer Chen and his wife. "You've raised an extraordinary son. He may have prevented something very serious today." News crews had begun arriving at the scene, their cameras capturing the touching moment between the former president and the young hero. A reporter approached, asking if they could interview Andy, but his parents politely declined. This was already a big day for their 5-year-old. Trump's security team was signaling that it was time to leave, but the former president had one more thing to say. He pulled out a business card and handed it to Officer Chen. "Have Andy and your family come visit me next month. We'll give you a special tour." He winked at Andy. "Maybe you can teach my security team a thing or two about staying alert." As Trump's motorcade pulled away from the McDonald's parking lot, Andy sat perched on his father's shoulders, waving goodbye. The morning sun was now high in the sky, and the excitement was starting to wind down. Officers were removing the yellow tape, and customers were being allowed back into the restaurant to collect their belongings. Detective Thompson approached one last time with a small badge sticker in her hand. "Honorary Junior Detective," she said, placing it on Andy's shirt. "You earned this today." Andy touched the sticker gently, his eyes wide with wonder. The events of that morning would be talked about for weeks to come in their small town. But for Andy, the most important thing was the proud look in his father's eyes and the knowledge that he had used what he'd learned to help keep people safe, just like his dad did every day. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity for Andy and his family. Their quiet suburban life had suddenly become the center of attention, with news vans parked outside their house and phones ringing constantly. Mrs. Chen had to unplug their home phone just to get some peace and quiet. Officer Chen took a few days off work to help shield his family from all the attention. He sat with Andy in their backyard treehouse, a special place where they often had their father-son talks. "You know, son," he said, "watching a butterfly land on the railing, sometimes the smallest actions can make the biggest difference." Andy was playing with his honorary junior detective badge sticker, which he had carefully preserved by covering it with clear tape. "Dad, were those men really bad guys?" he asked, his voice small and curious. Officer Chen thought carefully about how to answer. "They were people who made bad choices," he explained gently. "Thanks to you, they didn't get a chance to make worse ones." He pulled out a newspaper from his back pocket. The front page showed a picture of Andy with Trump at the McDonald's, though the Chen family had asked that their last name be kept private. The story was everywhere now. "5-year-old hero prevents potential crisis at local McDonald's," read one headline. Another paper called him the littlest watchman. Andy didn't fully understand why everyone was making such a big deal. He had just done what his dad had taught him. At kindergarten, Andy's teacher, Mrs. Wilson, had handled the situation beautifully. She didn't make a huge fuss, but did use the opportunity to teach the class about being observant and speaking up when something doesn't seem right. Andy's classmates were fascinated, especially when he demonstrated the hand signal he had used. One morning, while Andy was helping his mother water their garden, a sleek black car pulled up to their house. A woman in a suit stepped out and introduced herself as part of Trump's staff. She had come to discuss the promised visit to meet the former president. "We'd like to invite your family next weekend," she explained, sitting at their kitchen table while Andy peeked around the corner. "Mr. Trump has something special planned." She smiled warmly at Andy when she caught him looking. Mrs. Chen served her some lemonade while they worked out the details. The local police department had also taken notice of Andy's actions. Chief Reynolds visited their home personally to invite the family to a special ceremony. "We want to recognize Andy's quick thinking and bravery," he explained. "It's not every day we get help from such a young citizen." As the days passed, more details emerged about what had been prevented that morning at McDonald's. Officer Chen tried to shield Andy from most of it, but the boy understood enough to know that he had helped stop something bad from happening. That was all he needed to know. Andy's dad started teaching him more about safety and observation, turning it into a game they could play together. They would sit in the park and try to notice interesting things about people walking by, like someone carrying an umbrella on a sunny day or wearing a winter coat in warm weather. "Being observant isn't about being suspicious," Officer Chen explained. "It's about being aware and helpful." Andy nodded, spotting a lady who had dropped her keys without noticing. He ran to pick them up and return them to her, earning a bright smile and a thank you. The morning at McDonald's had changed something in Andy. He stood a little taller, paid more attention to his surroundings, and felt more confident about speaking up when something didn't seem right. His kindergarten teacher noticed that he had become a sort of unofficial helper in class, always watching out for other kids who needed assistance. Mrs. Chen found Andy one evening sitting by his bedroom window, looking thoughtful. "What's on your mind, sweetie?" she asked, sitting beside him. Andy turned to her with serious eyes. "Mom, do you think I could be a police officer like Dad when I grow up?" She hugged him close, smelling the grape shampoo in his hair. "You can be anything you want to be, Andy. You've already shown that you have what it takes to help others." They sat together, watching the sunset paint the sky in beautiful colors. The story of that Saturday morning had spread far beyond their small town, inspiring others to be more aware and willing to speak up. Parents used it to teach their children about being observant and brave, and police departments across the country started including it in their community outreach programs. But for Andy, life was slowly returning to normal. He still loved his McDonald's breakfast treats on Saturday mornings, though they now went to a different location. He still played with his toys, did his homework, and helped his mom in the garden. The only difference was the quiet confidence he had gained, the knowledge that even a small person could make a big difference in the world. The big day of the police ceremony arrived on a bright Thursday afternoon. Andy stood in front of his bedroom mirror, trying his best to make his clip-on tie straight while his mother helped him into a new blue blazer. She had tears in her eyes, though she tried to hide them with a bright smile. "You look so handsome," she said, smoothing down his unruly hair. Andy grinned, showing the new tooth that had started growing in where his baby tooth had fallen out. His father appeared in the doorway, already in his formal police uniform with all its shiny badges and buttons. "Ready for your big day, partner?" Officer Chen asked, giving Andy a playful salute. The little boy saluted back, just like his dad had taught him. The whole family piled into their car, with Andy clutching a small box his father had given him that morning, though he wasn't allowed to open it until later. The police station had been transformed for the ceremony. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from the walls, and chairs were set up in neat rows in the main hall. Andy spotted his kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Wilson, sitting with his entire class. They all waved excitedly when they saw him. Chief Reynolds met them at the entrance, shaking Andy's hand like he was a grown-up. "We've got quite a crowd today," he said, leading them inside. The hall was packed with police officers in formal uniforms, local officials, and community members. Andy even spotted the kind manager from McDonald's sitting near the front. As they took their seats, Andy noticed several news cameras set up at the back of the room. His mother had explained that people wanted to share his story to inspire others, but they would be careful not to show too much of their family for privacy reasons. The ceremony began with the police band playing music. Chief Reynolds stepped up to the podium and began speaking about bravery, community, and the importance of citizens young and old working together to keep everyone safe. Andy listened carefully, sitting up straight between his parents. "Today, we honor someone who reminds us that heroes come in all sizes," the chief said, looking directly at Andy. "Would Andy please come forward?" On slightly shaky legs, Andy walked to the front of the room, just like they had practiced the day before. Standing on a small platform so everyone could see him, Andy looked out at the sea of faces. His classmates were beaming, some giving him thumbs up. His teacher was wiping her eyes with a tissue. Even the tough-looking police officers were smiling warmly. Chief Reynolds presented Andy with a special junior police officer badge, a real one, not a sticker this time. It was smaller than a regular police badge, but otherwise looked exactly the same. The chief pinned it carefully to Andy's blazer while everyone applauded. But the surprises weren't over. The door at the back of the hall opened, and in walked Trump himself, accompanied by his security team. A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. The former president made his way to the front, stopping to shake hands with people along the way. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," Trump said into the microphone. He shared with the audience his perspective of that morning at McDonald's, describing how impressed he was by Andy's awareness and courage. "This young man reminds us that sometimes our greatest protectors are the ones we least expect." Andy's father then stood up and walked to the podium. He opened the small box he had given Andy that morning. Inside was his own childhood police badge, the one his father had given him when he first decided to become a police officer. "This has been in our family for 2 generations, Officer Chen said, his voice filled with emotion. "Today, I'm passing it on to the next generation." He handed the badge to Andy, who held it carefully in his small hands, understanding how special this moment was. The ceremony ended with a standing ovation. Andy's classmates rushed forward to congratulate him, all wanting to see his new badges. Parents took photos, officers shared handshakes, and somewhere in the back, a police dog barked happily as if adding its own approval. Later that evening at home, Andy sat in his favorite spot by the window. He held both badges in his hands, the new one from the police department and the family one from his father. The setting sun made them gleam like golden stars. His mother found him there, lost in thought. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" she asked, sitting beside him. Andy looked up at her with serious eyes. "I was just thinking," he said slowly, "about how Dad always says that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It just means you do the right thing anyway." Mrs. Chen pulled him close, and they sat together watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The events that had started with a simple breakfast at McDonald's had turned into something much bigger, a reminder that courage, awareness, and doing the right thing know no age limits. The promised visit to meet Trump arrived on a crisp fall morning, exactly 1 month after the McDonald's incident. Andy couldn't sleep the night before, too excited about the special tour. He woke up extra early, putting on his best clothes and carefully pinning both his new police badge and his family's heritage badge to his jacket. The drive was long, but Andy didn't mind. He watched the countryside roll by, counting red cars to pass the time. Again, his mother had taught him to help with his numbers. His father told stories about his early days as a police officer, making everyone laugh with tales of chasing runaway dogs and helping lost children find their parents. When they arrived at their destination, Andy's eyes went wide. The building was bigger than anything he'd seen before, with perfectly manicured lawns and fountains sparkling in the morning sun. Security guards at the gate checked their names against a list and waved them through with friendly smiles. "Welcome," called out a familiar voice. Trump stood at the entrance, dressed in his signature suit, looking exactly as he had that day at McDonald's. But this time, there was no tension or worry, just warmth and genuine happiness to see the family. "There's my young hero," Trump said, kneeling down to shake Andy's hand. He noticed the badges on Andy's jacket and asked about each one. Andy proudly explained the story behind his father's badge, making Trump nod appreciatively. That's what America is all about, family traditions and doing the right thing. The tour was amazing. Trump showed them through grand rooms filled with historical paintings and beautiful furniture. He had arranged for Andy to sit in the chair at a big important desk, making the little boy feel like he was president for a moment. Mrs. Chen took photos while Officer Chen explained the significance of various historical items they saw. In one room, they met a special guest, the head of the Secret Service training program. He had prepared something unique for Andy, a child-friendly presentation about observation skills and safety awareness. "We could use more people like you," he told Andy, showing him some of the basic techniques they teach their agents. During lunch in an elegant dining room, Trump shared stories about his own experiences with security and staying alert. He explained how important it is for everyone, not just security professionals, to be aware of their surroundings. Andy listened intently, occasionally adding his own observations that made the adults smile. "You know," Trump said, looking thoughtful, "what happened that day wasn't just about stopping something bad. It was about showing people that everyone can make a difference." He turned to Andy's parents. "You've taught him well about responsibility, awareness, and courage." The most special moment came after lunch. Trump led them to a room where he had a surprise waiting. On a table lay a beautifully framed certificate of appreciation specially made for Andy. But next to it was something even more remarkable, a letter. "This," Trump explained, "is going to be kept in our archives. It tells the story of how a 5-year-old boy showed us that heroes can be found anywhere." He read the letter aloud, describing how Andy's actions had inspired a new community awareness program that would be implemented across the country. Andy understood enough to know that his small action that Saturday morning had grown into something bigger than himself. The letter mentioned how schools and police departments were working together to teach children about being observant and speaking up when they noticed something wrong. As the day drew to a close, Trump had one final surprise. He presented Andy with a special challenge coin, similar to those carried by military and law enforcement personnel. "This is to remind you that you're part of a bigger family now, one that helps keep people safe." On the drive home, Andy held the challenge coin in his hand, feeling its weight and studying its details in the fading sunlight. His father glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "What are you thinking about, son?" Andy looked up, his face serious but peaceful. "I was thinking about how you always say that small things can make big changes, like ripples in a pond." His mother reached back to squeeze his hand, her eyes glistening with pride. That evening, as Andy got ready for bed, he carefully placed his new challenge coin next to his badges on his dresser. His mother found him standing there, looking at them thoughtfully. "You know what, Mom?" he said. "I think sometimes the best adventures start with just doing what's right." She hugged him tight, knowing that her little boy had learned one of life's most important lessons, that courage isn't about being the biggest or strongest, but about being willing to help others, even when it's scary or uncertain. As Andy drifted off to sleep that night, The moon casting gentle shadows through his window, he smiled, knowing that his ordinary Saturday morning breakfast had turned into an extraordinary lesson about bravery, awareness, and the power of doing the right thing. His father's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the smallest heroes make the biggest difference. And somewhere in the archives of history, a letter tells the story of a little boy who proved that heroism knows no age limit and that even the smallest among us can make the world a little bit safer, one careful observation at a time. The end.